It is the day you've all been waiting for, November 5th, which means it is episode 3 of The Backcourt, presented by Ticketmaster, a Brooklyn Nets podcast, hosted by me, Lucas Kaplan, writer for Nets Daily, maker of Nets Film Focus videos, along with the wonderful Brooklyn content team. And my co-host is Sarah Kustok, Nets czar, really. Well, I don't want to steal Mike Fratello's shine, but you are a czar of Nets basketball. Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic. We had a really good week of Nets basketball. I'm excited to talk about it.
We did have a big week of Nets basketball. Just to recap quickly, since the last time we recorded, they lost to the Denver Nuggets in overtime last Tuesday, I believe. Went on the road the next day, defeated the Memphis Grizzlies, came back home to defeat the Chicago Bulls, lost to the Detroit Pistons on Sunday, and then again on the second half of a back-to-back, defeated the Memphis Grizzlies, this time at home to sweep the season series. Overall, a 3-2 week, and yet somehow, through 5 games, the highlight was an off-court Iron Eagle flexing the Kid Super collection, which I know Sarah loved.
I loved it. I loved it. Anytime we can allow Ian to be in his most natural state, which is a comedian, it was
Mhm.
fantastic. I thought he rocked it pretty well. I don't think it was necessarily his look going forward, but it's some good gear. I wanted to
No,
steal it from him, to be honest.
it is some great gear. If I could impart some advice to Bird, it would just be to, rock it with a little more, even if it's not your style, you got to rock it with a little more confidence. I think that would have just made him feel a little better about it because it looked good. It was nothing physical, all mental. And then we also, Sarah and I were at if you see this poster, if you're watching above my left shoulder, from Braunschweig, I think, to Brooklyn, the Dennis Schroeder documentary produced by the Brooklyn Nets, 45 minutes on his basketball journey, his life journey. We both, I know we talked about it off camera, thought it was pretty awesome.
It was incredible. So often, Lucas, I'm sure you get this, that people will ask, who are your favorite players? Who are your favorite players you cover? And I think the beauty of what we get to do is not only see these players as players and professionals, but also as people. And it was such an extraordinary insight into the journey of how he has gotten to the point where he's at, the background. We know with every single one of these players, they have a amazing story of just resiliency and just challenges to get to that point, the family and the friends and the coaches and the people that are behind them. And so I think you got a excellent look into that from Dennis's point of view, from his family's point of view, and of course the Brooklyn Nets content team. Always, they are 10 out of 10 every time, and they did a fantastic job putting that together.
Dennis, not only being an international prospect as he was coming out of Germany, but even the specifics of his path within that, from how he was found at his local basketball club, his background as a skateboarding teen, his relationship with the local German media, how that changed over the course of his national team career. We've all heard, I think, bits and pieces of the Dennis Schroeder story, but to see it all the dots connected and for him to tell it, and not only that, little bits of color, how he met his wife. That's a story I
Yeah,
had
I
no
love
idea
it.
about.
Same.
That was great. And then, you mentioned this again off air, but to watch him watch it and reflect on it was
Yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah. No
Yeah,
doubt.
you can just tell Dennis has kind of, since he's gotten to Brooklyn, talked about how he's been, the role fatherhood has played in his professional and personal life, the role of maturity and being all these different teams and situations. And, it's not just talk. I mean, not that we thought it was, but especially to see the documentary and kind of put, I guess, the ideas onto the screen was just a great night. And I would encourage all Nets fans to watch it on YouTube. Speaking of Dennis, game winning, I guess, deflection steal yesterday to defeat the Memphis Grizzlies and wrap up the week. That was a fun game. What was it like to watch it courtside?
Amazing. As it has continued to be to watch this team in not only the wins, but I think even the losses, even the overtime loss to
Mm-hmm.
Denver. Even just learning about this group, it felt like an outlier, but the loss against Detroit and what they were
Yeah.
able to learn from that, the way that they rebounded from that performance in the second of a back-to-back against a Memphis team who was coming in, despite being undermanned, very motivated after the Nets had beaten them in Memphis. And I think when I look at this team to this point and we're gaining a stronger sample size, a word that pops out to me is Moxie. Like they have got, I know Jordy has used the word grit and wanting to be gritty. And that has been characteristic, but to me, it's on the same level of like just having some moxie at the end of games, being able to close, the confidence in one another, unselfish play, and that Chicago game in particular, closing things out, even
Yeah.
taking Denver to overtime. There was points throughout the game, the Memphis game, where it could have went left. It could have been to the opponent. It could have been momentums and runs and stretches. That they let go of the rope a little, and we have not seen that. And so I love watching not only how this team plays, but the process that they've really bought into game after game.
Yeah, and I mean Dennis exemplified that. I thought it was not his strongest game through 3 quarters, and yet after Jaren Jackson Jr. hits a three to put Memphis up one with 3 minutes left, Dennis hits a three to take the lead. Eventually gets a layup over Zach Edey, not an easy thing to do, to push it to 5. And then in post-game, he told all of us, Jordy was on the sideline and the coaching staff, they were kind of informing us what play Memphis was going to run. Nets were all over it. Dennis gets the deflection at the end, which messes up the play and, really seals the win. And it is Moxie's a good word for it because we've seen him have such awesome wire-to-wire games and dominate on offense. Yesterday was not that, but he made, 3 or 4 huge winning plays down the stretch. And if that's not Moxie, I don't know what is. My word would just be self-awareness because, and it goes hand in hand with Moxie, right? It's not an out-of-control confidence. For example, Memphis was huge last night. Santi Aldama, JJJ, Zach Edey front line. That's massive. Nets just aren't. They give up 66 points in the paint, but they do everything to combat it. It's an acknowledgement of what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And so they gang rebounded. They scored more second chance points than Memphis, which, I mean, to me says it all. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, and I think even to that point, you could look at stretches of the game. The tough part, there was a couple tough parts about that Detroit loss. One of it was as
Right.
simple as looking at like the shot profile and what that
Yeah.
looked like and how they were taking shots. I think too, the pace of Detroit, how slow they were playing, played into maybe some of the ways in which Brooklyn wasn't able to capitalize on how they wanted to play. But you said it like think about how many times you saw a Jalen Wilson drive through a body of a bigger player. You mentioned
Man.
Dennis Schröder, Cam Johnson doing the same thing. If you want to look at a perfect example of someone who was doing all the little things but not seeing the shot go through, and then Dorian Finney-Smith just absolutely torches the net in the second half from 3, something that they had been waiting on. There is that level of confidence and knowing that, okay, even if this hasn't worked exactly, we're still going to keep doing the things that we have practiced, that we built our foundation on, because we believe that will. And even you said about second chance points. To me, that's been a big key this season. Of the numbers may not bear it to me in the same way that the eye test and the timeliness of when they're getting some tip backs, when they're getting second chance opportunities, even if they're getting just different looks of a possession that they're not necessarily scoring on, but just retaining possession, getting a little momentum, chopping up the game for how the opponent wants to play. I think there's just a lot of little things, to your point, that they have been able to do that don't necessarily show up in the numbers in the same way that I think it's been impactful.
I really love that you said that because it gives me an opportunity to bring up a stat that I love because you look at how they battle and how they crash, for example, on the glass, and you see that, per cleaning the glass, which excludes garbage time, they are 22nd, 23rd in offensive rebounding.
Okay.
And you're like, well, that doesn't really line up with what I'm seeing. However, they are 7th in the league in points per miss, if that makes sense. So every time they miss a shot, they are
Yes.
7th in how many points they're generating off of it.
There you
So they
go.
like that is I think more in line with what we see from the
Yes.
team. Like
Yes.
they're high quality putbacks. They're at the rim or they're kicking it out to a 3-point shooter immediately. So it's not just the quantity of it, it's the quality of how they're playing. And I think that was definitely evident against the Grizzlies. And it's something that they have focused on, and it's something that really came up when I think Dennis Schröder was at the mic after the game. He said, "Yeah, they're big, but like we stuck to our principles. And for example, we're playing a front line of Jalen Wilson and Cam Johnson against Zach Edey, and yeah, Edey got like a couple putbacks against them, but Jalen's picking and popping out to the 3-point line, and they're spacing the floor, and they're driving and kicking." And playing your game in the face of like a big challenge, adversity, is easier than it sounds. Or harder than it sounds. Easier said than done.
Yeah. And that exactly, I think too, what I've been impressed with in so many occasions is how well they rotate, how well they communicate, how well, whether it's the backline
Mm-hmm.
defenders or those being at help side or the pressure they're putting on to have their teammates back, that does mitigate some of the size difference that they've had to deal with. And I also think just in terms of another standout to me with numbers that
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily bear out some of the things that you're watching, just the concept of pace and where they rank. And I think Jordy was asked about this and he clarified to whomever asked him in a pregame press conference. So you're talking about full court pace or half court pace? And I think that's something that we naturally don't always recognize because you're looking at
Mm-hmm.
numbers of full
Mm-hmm.
court pace, and because of the fouling and because of different situations, their pace is not nearly, I don't know where they're at, but it's bottom half of they play so fast in the half court. They obviously are super opportunistic when they get breaks and get runouts, but how much they cut, they move, they pass, the balance of the spacing that you're talking about, that to me is a major difference in maybe combating some of the size difference or just how they're sharing the basketball. And we hear so often the ball has energy. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You get a touch, even if you're not getting shots, if you're touching the ball in every position, you feel involved. That's the same way with the tip outs, same way with the second chance opportunities or getting some of those extra possessions. That gives you an energy and it gives you a little bit of a bump that I think goes a longer way, that is maybe an intangible part of how you're playing that impacts you in ways that the numbers are not going to necessarily show.
Exactly. For just raw pace stats, they are averaging 15 and a half seconds per possession, which is a bottom three mark in the league. However, that is, I think, to me, and that's what Jordy's talking about, full court pace, because they don't really get a lot of the 3 or 4 second possessions that juice that number, because also it takes a lot out of them to rebound defensively. They need 4 or 5 guys in the paint to box out the bigger players they're going up against, and they also don't have a ton of quick isolation bucket getters. They're not going to score if they don't make 3 or 4 passes on a possession, I think is what the half court pace kind of lends itself to. But the ball does fly around the half court, especially when they're going well. And there's something you said I liked where it was the Detroit game was not good, but it was good in a sense to learn about this team. There's 82 games, they're not going to cruise to a win by playing the style that they perfectly want to play every time. They're at home, they just won 2 in a row, and they get punched in the mouth unexpectedly, maybe. That stuff happens. And I think we were talking about it was a good lesson to see what it's like when things aren't going well for this team. And to me, what stood out was the slow pace in the half court. Like in that Detroit game, that's the one thing that is going to separate their good nights from their bad nights. I don't know if you agree.
I absolutely agree because it's also getting to your second, third, fourth options. You talk about you watch the NFL all the time, like a quarterback going through his progressions. Like you got to go through your progressions. You got to get it to the second side. You got to shift. You got to rotate the defense. I think in the Detroit game, we saw so often them just loading up on the ball on the strong side, going in one act, and they weren't getting to those second, third, fourth options in moving the defense in the ways that we see them do so well so often. And to your point, like that's the learning experience, and that's a part of the learning curve that once you figure those things out and see what that looks like, see the shots you're getting and how that necessarily isn't functioning. And also think that goes back to if you're taking poor shots or if you're allowing a team just to get a rebound and go and run and leak out, then that's putting a ton more pressure on your defense. And we saw the transition defense really lacking in that game. And I think a big part of that was due not just their turnovers, but due to the selection of shots that lended itself to that.
Definitely. Detroit out-physicaled them, but Memphis didn't really because Brooklyn didn't let them. If you're playing in space and you're taking advantage of the fact that you have more shooting on the court, you're maybe playing 5 out, then the other team, even if they're bigger, is not always in a position to out-physical you. So I think it all ties back to what I started this segment talking about, which is the Nets mitigating maybe some of their size disadvantages that they'll see. As we veer towards talking about specific players, those were our general takeaways. Who was your pick for Brooklyn's finest? Just a player, maybe not the MVP of the week, but just a player that an admirable, week for them, a very just, you want to give him some love.
I want to give love and shout out Dorian Finney-Smith.
Yeah.
Because I think it's all the little things. It's all the unseen things. It's all the game-winning plays. It's the way in which he is such an anchor, obviously on the defensive side and communication, but ability to, we use the term so often, guarding multiple positions. And, you guard 1 through 5. He truly was tasked with guarding such a multitude of different skill set players. And he does it with such ease. And also to watch what he was able to do in that second half. I know it's very, but the second half of the Memphis game, how important those 3-point shots were. The confidence to keep taking it. You need to be that way as a 3-point shooter. But at different points of the season, especially the start to the season, it's not easy when you're not seeing your shot go through early. And so much of what you're relied upon is doing those things on the defensive end. And so I think, for so many reasons, he has been such an integral part to the core of this group. And I do think that we talk about him a lot, but I think for those who watch, and maybe don't always catch all the nuances of things he does possession by possession, you got to give a ton of love for the start to this season by Brooklyn for how he's contributed.
Yeah, I mean, Dorian was at Virginia Tech and then Florida, and his cell was essentially big, long 2-guard, 3-guard, or small forward, I guess, sort of thing. He's been playing center literally to start the year, as in like plain drop coverage matched up with the opposing center, not in a cutesy sort of small ball way, but like they're actually asking him to play
do things. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, he's like shooting threes, but even on the other end, he's also screening a lot at the top of the key, picking and popping. It's not necessarily the basketball he's played for his whole life. Jordi Fernandez, by the way, it's a function, it's out of necessity. Clack's not healthy enough to start until yesterday. He was on the minutes plan. Dayron's out. Ben has missed 2 games. Trendon Watford even is out. Noah Clowney, his sophomore year, is just getting a taste, right, of what it's like to be.
And was out the other
And was
game,
out yesterday.
So, yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that. He was out. Doesn't seem to be too serious. But point being, Dorian, I've asked him, I'm like, isn't it crazy that you were like a 2-guard in college and like you're guarding Nikola Jokic? He won't even engage. He won't even like, he's just, that's not who he is. He's just like, I do what is asked of me. And he really does it with such vigor and is like diving on the floor. And, we can be real. He's like a 30-year-old and he was in trade rumors in the offseason, and you wouldn't know any of that context for a second if you watched him play.
And that's what I love about
Hmm.
this team, because you could go player by player and list off a lot of reasons that they would maybe not be showing up in the same way, or given that fierceness, bigger like intensity of how they're playing, or the ways in which they're just buying in wholeheartedly. And it's so amazing just to see, because they're playing for one another, and everything the coaching staff has asked. Like, I also, if I could have like a second net shout out, it would be the coaching staff. Like Jordy Fernandez, yes, at the start of it, but the entirety of the coaching staff, they are so locked in exactly making sure to communicate what they need, what they're looking for, and doing so in a way of confidence, of poise, of giving their players trust. And you see that as a two-way street of how the players have then in turn been responding. And so I think all of it is made for. It's always fun to start a season, Lucas. I know we did episode 1, and you can't wait to see what things kind of shake out and look like. But how this team is playing is something that I have just thoroughly enjoyed every bit, the start of these first 2 weeks.
Exactly, and that's why Dorian is a good choice, because he exemplifies that. The
What do you
quote from
got?
Jordy.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. I
I'm
thought you were
sorry.
going to give yours. No,
I
bring us.
will.
You got all the good quotes. Come on, bring it.
I
Bring it.
do. I well, it is my job when I'm at the games. Jordy said literally, I put him in tough spots, guarding centers, guarding guards. I'm doing all this to him, and he's fighting. And for the shot to go in, that's why I'm so happy for him. I also want to point out, after Dorian's first three, he pointed to the bench, and I was like, I wonder who he's pointing to. Maybe I'll ask him about that. And before it could even get to me in post game, he's like, yeah, assistant coach Didi, Davidis Dolkus, gave him, like, you gotta, you're not getting as much lift on your legs as your shot. That was the first guy Dorian shouted out in post game. That really, I think, says a lot. Says it all about his character. Guy just hit 5 threes. For me, Jalen Wilson, I just had to. I mean, he's so good right now. He's just playing so well.
I felt like I
You
couldn't
have,
pick him 2 weeks in a row. I think I did him last week. So keep it going, because I'm
but
on
he's
board with
even,
you.
but he's even better now, wouldn't you
Yeah.
say? I
Yes.
mean, good to
Yes.
great, I guess.
Yes, and continues to thrive. Yeah, I'm curious of things. I just the way in which he has attacked bigs in the basket, and not just off. We saw some great finishes by him, strong finishes through contact. The playmaking and him getting in the
Yeah.
paint. Like, we talk so much about paint touches and how paint touches will help the offense operate, whether through penetration, through passes, and just the movement, the inside out. He's made so many beautiful plays of getting in the teeth of the defense and guys cutting off of them. And that, to me, like, you got a guy who is a lights out 3-point shooter that can also finish at the rim through contact, who can also get in the paint and make plays, and then he's gonna pick up and defend whomever at the defensive end. Like, that's something to be excited about.
You know how you know? This is how you know. He shot 0 of 6 from 3 yesterday, and that was like a swing skill, a question, or just like, oh, if he shoots, he might be really whatever. Shot 0 for 6 from 3 against Memphis. How good was he? Like an
Awesome.
A?
You
A
wouldn't
plus?
even, yeah, and you wouldn't even,
Yeah.
honestly, I don't have a stat sheet in front of me. I wouldn't have even remembered that, because all I could
No.
think about was the defensive plays he made, the rebounding, and then all the playmaking and all the strong takes and tough baskets at the rim, that not only were they, okay, 2 points, the timeliness. And that's where I feel like the timeliness of understanding when to be aggressive, when to be assertive, and always be under control. That's hard to teach, and that is so impressive for a player that's only in his second year in the league and really only getting quality time now in this early part of the year.
Yeah. There are 3 things for me, very briefly. One, he's on defense. He is a force around the basket, in that, like, he's contesting shots at the rim, he's helping at the rim, he's vertical, and he's forcing a lot of misses. 2, great cutter off the ball. He bails the nets out of so many possessions that maybe aren't going anywhere, and then he makes a cut at the last second and they get a good look. And 3 is the late decision making. Late in drives is kind of what I mean. Like, he gets
That
all the way to the
is
rim.
such an excellent point. Yep.
He like, it's at the point of, inflection, I guess. And a lot of guys would take like a tough shot over the help. At the very last second, he kicks it out to a wide open shooter, or, if he has the shot, he takes it. And for all my draft Twitter nerds, this is, I think, to me, a case of early production, high ceiling. Because, right, there's this thing, older prospects, maybe high floor, low ceiling. They're going to be good right away, but I don't know how good they can eventually be. Jaylen's playing so well that he's going to keep getting more minutes. And because he's going to keep getting more minutes, because he's producing, he's going to be able to figure out some different finishes around the basket, a little bit of a mid-range game. Like, he's going to be able to work through the things he needs to work through in game because he's playing so well. Like, the value of a young player, of a rookie or sophomore producing is like, he's the case study right there. So I'm so excited for him. I'm sure you feel the same way.
I do. And I love that you said that, because that's such a cute observation of how calm he is and does not panic. Shot clock winding down under pressure, wherever the time is at. And that to me is just steadiness that he shows up with and how he plays. And I also think too, just the translation of he's a winner. And so he won a Kansas, he's used to winning. And he's shown that Long Island at Summer League, obviously there. So when you're now transferring players to in a foundational year that are like, oh no, what I do is win, and I understand how to win. And then you start to look at a Dorian Finney-Smith and that's why I think there's a collection. Jordy Fernandez talked, I think it was one of the, early on in the season in the games of a press conference. He's like, I know what winning feels like. The organizations and teams that I've coached with have won. So I know what that looks like. And to me, that's why you're seeing a lot of these results early on.
Yeah. And that's a great transition to our next segment, which is called The Next Net. Sean Marks said it, opening presser. This season's all about finding the next net. Who's going to be part of a long-term winning organization. And for me, the next net, who I'll be watching over the next week, who really intrigued me, who I want to see more from, for similar reasons to Jaylen Wilson, it's Keon Johnson.
Ooh, okay.
Because
tell me more.
Let me give you the sitch on Keon Johnson, right? Uber athletic prospect out of Tennessee. Everybody knew that. Can jump out of the gym, whatever, raw. In his first couple stops, LA and Portland, right, it was about putting that together and translating all of that, I guess, athleticism into production, as it is for a lot of young players. In Summer League, this past season, it was like, oh, he's slowing down. He's using his athleticism to get into the lane and then make the right play. And it's like, he doesn't need to go full speed all the time to be athletic, if that makes sense. Like, he can play under control and still get by you. And that was always the question with him. And he did that in Summer League. The Nets rewarded him with a 2-year contract. And I think this past week has been exactly that. And when a young player or a prospect is doing well because they make a bunch of tough jump shots, that's great, but it might not be super predictive. Keon is doing all the stuff that were his question marks, at least over this past week. Like, he's making good decisions with the ball. And then, yeah, he will do a 360 type dunk in traffic because he has that in him. But to me, what's even more impressive is get by my guy, make a pass in the paint. That's what the Nets really need to do to be good. They need to make good decisions when they have the ball in their hands, when they get downhill. Keon doing that is awesome. I'm really excited. It seems like he's earned a spot in the immediate future in the rotation. That's why he's my next net to watch this upcoming week.
You are spot on, and I couldn't agree more. And I will, co-sign all the things you said, and have loved it. And you think about the important stretch. Was it the Chicago game that he had such an important stretch that he scored 11 or whatnot in 10 minutes or vice versa, in doing so with such an efficient way? We've talked obviously a lot about Jaylen Wilson. We've already talked about Noah Clowney. I would add Zaire Williams. I think at some point we had touched on that. I'm so intrigued, excited by, but continue to be intrigued about the progress of Cam Thomas this season. He has been just a scoring phenom, as we always know him to be. In particular, the early part of the season, you could look at the numbers, game winners, closing out games, all of that. In the early games, it was too, as Jordy Fernandez had talked about, the buy-in and the engagement, seeing him more engaged with, I think, was very visible on the defensive end, the willingness to pass, to play make. The last couple of games, he has not been as efficient in scoring.
No.
And in some ways, that will, and this is natural, especially for a young player, because he's still, only 22 years old. That can affect you on the other end, especially when a lot of what you pride yourself in is on the offensive side. It is in shooting and scoring. How does that affect what you're doing on the defensive side? How does that affect your decision making and shot selection? And so I think we've seen, which is perfectly normal, but a slight drop off in that efficiency, and then what that looked like and how it affected the other areas of his game. And so to me, I think this is all a part of the process for the player he's going to continue to become. And so the next couple of weeks, obviously this whole season, but until we talk next on the podcast, I'm curious to see what these next couple of games look like and how he responds from that, how he rebounds from that, and the continued engagement of, not only what the efficiency of the shooting looks like, but also, is that engagement still there defensively? Is that buy-in still there? Is that fervor and energy of, it doesn't matter. We have talked about Jalen Wilson going 0-6 from 3, but man, he got to the basket and he scored a ton and did every other thing you could possibly ask for, and it was almost non-noticeable, shooting. Can Cam Thomas also be, in some capacity, that type of player?
Yeah, and it's not going to get easier, which I think is why he's a good candidate for this. Like, the defense, everyone's throwing their best perimeter defender on him. They're being physical. They're taking a couple fouls early just to let him know how it's going to be for 48 minutes. But, that's what Cam Thomas, that's the player he's going to have to be in this league. And that's the player he wants to be.
Yes.
Because we've seen it for stretches. And so this is going to be a good test. How do you rebound from a couple 6 of 17 games? He had 6 assists, his season high in the Memphis game. He shot 6 of 17. So that's a really good choice for next net in terms of this next week. Things haven't really been going his way shooting the ball. What's the response going to be? The one thing I want to add on Keon, point of attack defense, perimeter defense. I don't know if you've also noticed that because I just only talked about the offense.
Yes. Yeah. Run with it. Yeah. I mean, I think that's that's also a product of, I think, what Jordy is asking of these players. But whether we've seen that out of Keon a ton, we see it, of course, out of Dennis Schröder, who I think he spoke in his post-game press conference after Memphis of, this is the player I am. This is what I came into the league doing. This is part of who I am. But Jalen Wilson, Zaire, all of them. But that needs to be almost an elite level skill set that these guys are bringing to the table to make that defense function how they want to. And I think, as you mentioned, Keon has done that. And he's in on that as much as he is on how he can score offensively.
Yeah, I liked that it was still their identity against Ja, even though because it's Ja, he'll blow by you and get some buckets at the rim. But just because that happens, it can't stop being part of your identity. Yep. You have to live with your weaknesses while living with your strengths. Trivia.
Yes. I don't want to tell you that the other parts of the show I don't love, but this is kind of my favorite.
Okay, don't tell me that. You should not tell me that. But Memphis, they swept the season series. First team in the NBA this year to notch a season series sweep. How about that?
Okay.
The last time they swept Memphis was 2017-2018.
Okay.
So start preparing your brain.
Okay.
They swept Memphis. There was an early season game. There was a late season game. They won both. Who were the leading scorers for the Nets in each of those games? Also, hint, 2 players tied in one of the games. So there are 3 answers. And here's another hint. All 3 players hit 4 threes in those games to give you sort of a boost as well. 2017-2018 Brooklyn Nets roster.
D'Angelo Russell?
No, this is it's a little.
Joe Harris?
No.
17-18.
You have the right. You're there.
Harris LeVert?
Yes, that's one.
Spencer Dinwiddie?
No, That was Karas's, it was nearly his career high at the time. He scored 27. Then a week later, he scored 22. It was like his breakout. So the other two were veterans. They've been well-traveled. No. It's a guy, one of the guys I know you love.
DeMarre Carroll.
Yes, there we go. DeMarre Carroll hit 4 threes.
DeMarre Carroll, Caris LeVert.
There was another player in one of the games who tied.
Am I a fan of this player? Or
I think so. Shooter.
I'm trying to think of that. And definitely don't tell me. I'm trying to think of that team that I would think of 3-point shooters that are not D'Angelo, Joe, Spencer, another shooter from that group. DeMarre.
Nets fans are gonna You
said a veteran. You said a veteran
had been well traveled.
Was that Karas's rookie year or second year?
That was Karas's second year. I would say one hint: Ian Eagle made a lot of puns about this player's last name.
Oh, now I definitely should get it, and I can't believe that I'm blanking. Was it a guard? Like, was it a proper like 1 or 2?
It was a 2.
Or from Cal?
Yeah.
No, from Cal.
Yeah.
I mean, not Jorge Gutierrez.
Oh my God! It's Alan Crabb.
Oh my goodness!
From Cal, you said it. Why'd you say it?
I totally forgot that Alan Crabb even, oh my goodness.
I know.
This really is a blast from the past. Alan Crabb.
The Crab Shack.
I want to say I forgot that Alan Crabb played for the Nets during that time, but I kind of did.
I know. I that's the one I wanted you to get, but it's okay.
Did you think I was going to get that? I should have gotten that.
I thought it was 50-50. I mean, I thought it was 50-50.
It's funny, that I blanked on him even play, because that would have been an obvious choice. You want to talk about a 3-point shooter.
Cal Berkeley legend.
Yeah. I was pretty certain that it wasn't Jorge, but I thought I would talk. That was the only other Cal that I had
Always
remembered.
a good time when the Nets beat Memphis. Memphis caused the Nets some heartbreak for a couple of years there. I remember just some tough games that they lost at the buzzer, but swept the season series. We got to see Ja Morant pull off some just astounding, hilarious 360 layups, and the Nets still got the win. So I would say Monday night was a perfect night at the Barclays Center. Great week for the Nets. Sarah, any final thoughts?
No, let's go. Let's keep this rolling. This has been fun to watch and fun to see the growth. And so I can't wait to. It's going to be a good test against some really good teams. Going to Boston, to Cleveland, New Orleans, see where they're at. So I think this is a challenging stretch to the schedule for Brooklyn. So I'm very interested to see how they're able to ride it out.
Sarah said it. That is the week ahead for the Nets, back-to-back in Boston and Cleveland, then down to New Orleans before the next time we record. This has been episode 3 of The Backcourt. Signing off, your hosts, Sarah Kustok and Lucas Kaplan. Reminder just to give us 5 stars, like it, whatever your platform's method of interacting with the podcast is, and telling the Backcourt that we are great would be very much appreciated. We will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.